Loud, and today I'm excited to be talking with another artist and composer from the Tri-Cities, Reginald Unterseher. How are you doing today, Reg?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm actually in the Tri-Cities, despite not exactly in the reactor as it looks like I am,
Well, we'll choose to believe that you're there anyway.
but
So just a quick overview of Mr. Unterseher's impressive resume. He's currently the music director and composer in residence at Shalom United Church in Richland. He's got works published by Oxford University Press, Walton Music, his own website. He's been Composer of the Year for the Washington State Music Teachers Association. He's been featured at ACDA and MENC conventions. He's had his music performed at Carnegie Hall. I could go on and on. Be sure to check out his website for his full impressive resume and, of course, to hear some of his wonderful music. So, yeah, without further ado, let's get jumping right in. I'm always giddy to talk to another musician, especially one who's also been inspired by the same things that I have.
yeah, yeah.
So talk a little bit about how you became interested in music and how you found your way here to the Tri-Cities.
So music was always part of my family life when I was a little kid. I don't remember a time when that wasn't a thing. My dad was always sang. My mom was a piano player and vibraphone player, even better.
Ooh.
We had vibraphone and a Hammond C3 in our house. One of
Oh,
the kind with the
sweet.
revolving speakers and everything. It
Yeah,
was
with the
awesome.
Leslie.
It was great. But yeah, so we always did that sort of thing. And I have two older sisters and one younger brother, and we always did things together, duets, trios, and we'd put on little programs. So so that was just always part of life.
Hmm.
I didn't expect to become a performer or a composer professionally. I was going to be an elementary teacher. I was going to be a kindergarten teacher. I was going to be a lot of those sort of things. But the performing bug kind of took over in college, and I ended up first really being a performer professionally. I mean, I'd started writing things when I was a kid. I mean, that's like most of us do. I mean, I remember the first piece I actually wrote down was in the eighth grade because I had to have a thing for a program, so I wrote it down. I mean, that's the way so many of us start. It's like,
Yeah,
well, I have this performance to come up. What am I going to do? I don't know. It'd be faster to write something
exactly.
and more fun to write something than it would be to to find something that works. So yeah. I worked as in opera music theater for several years, quite a few years, running around the country and that sort of thing. Burnt out on that actually rather rapidly. I really did not like living in hotels. I did not like that part of it a lot. My wife was a family physician in Tri-Cities, and she brought us here. I kind of came kicking and screaming the way so many people do coming to Tri-Cities, that was not our place that we wanted to be. The place-bound spouse is a long and is a long story in
Hmm.
Tri-Cities, and the source of a lot of richness in the Tri-Cities as well. I mean, there's a lot of people who have come with a partner who ended up doing a lot of stuff in Tri-Cities. And the way that so many of us do, I thought we'd be here a couple of years. It's been 35 years it's been over 30 years since I thought I would leave. So, and one of the things that you discover traveling around is that every place is a place. Every place has its ups and its downs. Every place has its complications, and Tri-Cities has an amazing amount of richness in people. And we have this crazy technological and scientific background too that
Hmm.
I really didn't know about. I grew up as a kid in Walla Walla, and because everything over here was a secret, like what you see behind me we didn't know about that.
Right.
It was everything was a secret, so I did not know what was really here. She was a Tri-Cities kid, and we ended up moving here, and that 30 some years ago. That was in we're still here.
Hmm.
And so as I started looking for what my musical life would be here rather than on the road, I went back to composing. I started conducting some, and the same sort of thing happened. As I need a piece for this program that uses these people and does this thing, and I can't find
Right.
one fine. I'll just write one. So started doing that, and that kind of keeps going. After a while, and they go, "Oh, that was fun." And especially once I was past the academic side of things. I mean,
Mm.
I had studied some composition in college, but this was in the 70s. This was when, I mean, I was actually told one time, not by my college professors, but by somebody else. And it's like, well, if people can understand that music, then it's not really art.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of the academic attitude, that it needed to be esoteric, that it needed to be incomprehensible, that it needed to be obtuse, it needed to be weird, and
Yeah.
whatever. And I do like that kind of music, but I didn't really want to write it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I came back to writing again, it was like, oh, I can just write what I want to hear. I don't have to please a professor or some sort of person who I think knows more than me. I can just write what I want to hear. So that kind of got me back in. And lo and behold, other people are kind of more interested in hearing what I actually want to hear than than my internal monologue about what my professors thought
Yeah.
does. So yeah, so that's where I kind of I got back into it, and eventually, other people wanted to hear it, so I provided it to them in the ways I could. So
Yeah.
that's
You
kind of
probably
where
would
I
have
am.
you probably would have started writing about the time that composers like Milton Babbitt were kind of in vogue, weren't you?
Very much, very much. I mean, that's from from so the people that I was studying with, that was their ideal. That was their, the less the less it made sense to regular people, the better it probably was. And that, it's like, yeah, no, I don't think so. So so yeah, yeah. So,
All right. So you grew up in Walla Walla, just kind of down the road
mhm.
from the Tri Cities. You referenced that
Yep.
and the Hanford site. Was there a moment when you realized that this particular region or where you were growing up had a unique history, or that something weird was going on that wasn't happening other places?
I, it, it's a little embarrassing to say this, but I guess it's kind of a sign of how things were in the 60s and 70s and 80s, is that I did not know what was here in the Tri-Cities until I
Mm-hmm.
moved back in the
Mm.
80s. I mean, I never heard about this stuff as a kid. I never, I mean, I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. I remember the Kennedy assassination. I mean, there were things that we heard about. Hanford was not one of the things that was discussed. I mean, it was a deep, dark secret. My wife talks about that in in being a kid, in that you were not allowed to ask what your friends' parents did for work. I mean, that sort of thing was just not discussed, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a cultural legacy to that, to the idea of secrecy, to the idea of security, that kind of persists, and we're
Yeah.
still dealing with some of the legacy of that. There's still attitudes about things that we still deal with. Even though, as you can see from behind me, you can walk into the B reactor now. I mean, it's a museum. You can
Yeah.
walk in there, and it's like, but it's yeah. I remember the first time going out there for an event where they, in a tent outside, they served beer, and a
Mm.
Hanford worker was like, you could just see the little explosion out the top of his head. It was like, this is, I can't, we, but it was, things change.
Yeah.
Things change.
Oh, that's funny. And that echoes actually something that was said by another guest we had on this series, Kathleen Flanagan, who talked about the
Mm,
role of secrecy when she was
yeah,
growing up and not being able to ask what your friends' parents did and things like that. It
exactly.
seems to be a common thread.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And Kathleen and I are pretty close to the same age, and
Hmm.
we grew up in the same area. Although she was here and I was in Walla Walla, so there are differences, but
Yeah.
what we would know and what we wouldn't know. Yeah. And it was kind of a mind-blowing experience for me to come across this history and start to understand this history and start to be exposed to this history. And the same thing with the depot by Umatilla, where
Yeah.
now all those weapons are just. I mean, we used to drive by those bunkers when I was a kid, and it was like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of buildings. What are those? I don't know. That was it.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about your art specifically.
Hmm.
And you've, since moving here, written several pieces inspired by the Hanford site and the Manhattan Project, several of which have been performed where you sit at this very moment
Exactly.
inside the B
Exactly.
reactor.
Yeah.
What compelled you to write these pieces, and what was the experience of performing that music in the building that you're in right now? What was
Yeah.
that like?
So, science has always been something that's interested me, and the history of the nuclear age has always been something that interested me, and what that is. I mentioned already, I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. I was a kid who grew up. I was in part of the first generation that grew up in the nuclear shadow.
Hmm.
The potential of complete nuclear annihilation was a thing. That was something that we were aware of. And so it already interested me, and then to be here, where from my house I can see nuclear reactors. I mean, that's kind of startling to me,
Hmm.
and amazing to me. Um, and then when there was this move, so I was interested, and I knew, and a lot of my friends naturally, in Tri-Cities, are people who who worked in the nuclear industry, various aspects of it, mostly in the cleanup part.
Right.
But various aspects of it. I mean, I know people who worked here from early days. Um, so it was of general interest, and it's like that's a thing. When the B reactor began to be talked about as being preserved and turned into a museum, and to eventually become part of the national parks system, um, the first time I could, first as soon as I could get out there, I went out there on a tour. I could to go out and see that, and it was shocking and stunning to me to be in that place, that is both, really the dawn of the nuclear age. I'm right there, right there. In many significant ways. That's not the only place, but really part of that. And what a shift in world history that is. I mean, that is huge. That shift. And to be right there. I mean, it feels like the pyramids to me.
Hmm.
I mean, it's something of world significance. And we, in the Tri-Cities and in Walla, and a lot of these places, we think of ourselves as small town people where nothing really important ever happens. And no, that's not true. That is, we might be small town people but this is huge. So I mean, that had a big impact on me. Just to see what it was, and to see that it's reality, and to see and to be in that space. And of course, when I walked into this room that you see, this is a room that is about the size of a small cathedral,
Hmm.
and the sound is like a cathedral sound. And I was immediately struck by the acoustic properties of this room. And it was just immediately, we have to do music here. We have to do music in this room, not
Hmm.
just about this subject, but in this room. So that really set me off on looking for other people who made art about this crazy place. And
Hmm.
Kathleen was one of them. I mean, Kathleen's book Plume came out pretty close to that, at that time. When I was kind of stalking that book, and I was able to get it right as soon as it came out, and
Hmm.
devoured it in a couple of gulps. And it was like, I know, I have to set some of these poems. I have to set some of these poems. And I didn't know Kathleen. We didn't have any point of contact, but I did the internet stalking thing that really made me very nervous to do. That I felt, it's like, okay, I'm just this crazy. As far as she knows, I'm just this crazy person, living at the end of a road. Who's, what does she know? But I'm gonna find her anyway. I'm gonna go ahead and contact her. So I did. I just, cold called her and said, "Yeah, I like this book. I'm real interested. I write music-ish things and stuff." And I was about that articulate. Um, and she was great, and she was very interested and very warm and welcoming. And so the first project that I did that really was Hanford related stuff was the stuff that I call the Hanford songs, which was um, a set of poems from her book Plume.
Hmm.
Um, and that was for the Washington State Music Teachers Association project, and that was, string quartet and soprano. And at first was performed in Wenatchee in a performing arts center. Actually, we did eventually get to do them in the B reactor, which was
Hmm.
very cool. And then when we started a process of trying to get to do music in the B reactor, and that was, wow. I mean, when you talk to, we sent somebody, Justin Raffo from the Mid-Columbia Master Singers, and I
Hmm.
were, I think we were on that same tour together. We were like, what are we doing? We got to do something. Um, Sent a letter. We sent a letter. And the Department of Energy was like, the Department of Energy doesn't do concerts. What are you people crazy? They didn't say the "what are you people crazy" part, but we kind of interpolated that. It's like, because, yeah, this is not a place that had anything having to do with aesthetics, or the philosophy of things. This is a very practical. We have a thing to build. We're making a thing.
Right.
and it was very purpose driven from that. And now we're in an era where we're reflecting on that history, and it took them a while to come around to this possibility of even being a thing to think about. And Justin being the great person he is, and very good at making friends with people and keeping talking to people, until we slowly started getting asked to do things, and we were at some of the early events of the reactor, when they started inviting the public in general for larger events. So Master Singer sang, and we got to do a concert. I wrote up another piece that was, the last poem in Kathleen's book Plume, called "If You Can Read This," and that was in the first concert that we did out there. And so that was, and Kathleen got to come. That was stunning and exciting and amazing
Yeah.
to me to get to be part of that. And then, and that led to the last fall's project, called Nuclear Dreams, the one
Mm-hmm.
that, so this stuff was all more in my consciousness as time went on. Um, of how many months? It was about a year after the first concert. A friend of mine who had been who was an amazing writer, but had worked at Hanford for years, named Nancy Welliver, um, posted on Facebook a dream that she'd had about the first concert that we had.
Mm.
And it had a picture of the reactor face. It had some really interesting things. And I said, "Wow, Nancy, that's amazing. Wow, that's a really cool dream." She says, "Well, I wrote, a paper about the dreams of nuclear workers." And I
Whoa.
kind of like, "No, I did not know that. I would dearly love to see that."
Mm-hmm.
So it was, um, so it grew from there into a full length, concert based on that stuff. So we developed it into a more narrative script, with a few more things, but based on the dreams of nuclear workers, which
Mm.
was like, man, and they are amazing. The dreams are amazing. They're surreal and mundane and terrifying and hilarious and all these things together. And we wove in a few other things as well. There's several, discussions of the first people who lived out in this site of the Wanapum. There's a story of, the writings actually of Smokala, who was a shaman who founded a very interesting dream religion out
Mm.
near there, which was like, oh well, okay, how on point is that?
Yeah.
So that thing, that is in there. There's a friend of mine who's now passed away, who grew up on a farm, on what is now the Hanford Reservation, and who had lots of Wanapum friends. And so there's a story of him and what happened to his farm, and what happened to his friends. That story is in there. There's, yeah, and that's a few other references to that sort of thing. But it's it covers a wide time period of people's reactions to the land before, and what the reactors were, and what the work was, and what it's like to work in that sort of situation. There's also a bit from, um, a documentary by Morgan Knibbie, that the New York Times published, just a year and a half ago, about interviews, that it's all taken from interviews with soldiers who were subjected to some of the first, battlefield tests of nuclear
Yeah.
weapons, where they would be put in trenches and they'd blow up a bomb and say, "Now run in there, let's see what happens." And it's like, you what? Anyway, so
Yeah.
so and they were not allowed to talk about that until the late 90s, on pain of being executed for treason.
Yeah.
So that when we found that, Nancy and I immediately said, "Can we use some of that?" And they were very gracious and said yes. So there's a bit from that in the thing, and then we got to perform that in the reactor last a year ago September. So that was just a stunning and amazing. I so many times. This reactor it feels a little bit like home to me now. I've been out there so many times and performed in there so many times, and every time I go out there, I still have this. I can't believe that I get to do
Yeah.
this. It's like, what? Nobody else gets to do this.
Yeah.
And not, I can't believe that I get to do it. It's amazing to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we touched a little bit on, kind of the nuclear testing, the nuclear age kind of thing, all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
And that was a period of global anxiety that I in my youth did not
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
And we're, as far as I can tell, we're in a time that maybe now is the closest we have come to that sort of anxiety again, this time in the form of a pandemic.
Yeah.
As of this recording, it is just the very end of July, beginning of August, and particularly in this country, we're still struggling with the presence of the virus and
Yeah.
the right things to do. And I'm wondering, in times like these, like in the Cold War and nuclear testing, and during this pandemic, what do you see as your role as a musician and an artist, especially considering that we can't perform for others?
Yeah. No, that's a complicated subject for us because there are so many things that we want to do, and there's so many ways that we feel immobilized, and there's sometimes that we've, and a lot of times our role as artists is to provide reflection on things, and an inward look, a way to contemplate things, and it's hard to do that when you're on the front edge of it.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do. The nuclear project, for instance, these are when they started this, their only perspective was we have to prevent Hitler from getting the nuclear bomb before we do.
Right.
That was their driving force.
Of
They did
course.
not have perspective past that. We are kind of in that in the pandemic, in that when we first did lockdown, I mean, what was known about the virus was tiny. I mean, zero. Okay, we got to try this. We got to do this. There's a lot of parallels of that in the development of nuclear technology, and
Mm-hmm.
and that's how the waste problems develop. It's like, well, we'll figure that out later. There's a lot of that going on. It's like, well, we'll try this. Well, does it work? Well, we'll try it. We'll figure it out later. There's a lot of that going on. And 5 years from now, we're going to know a lot more than we do right now.
Right.
And we might find out that some of the things that we're doing are great, and might find out that some of the things we're doing are making things worse. Um, and that was the case. Anytime we are faced as a society with giant changes, we also then have to deal with the range of response to that.
Mm-hmm.
Some people collapse, and some people have wildly unuseful responses to
Yeah.
things, and yeah, and we are certainly experiencing that right now. I mean, where people are thinking of the pandemic in terms of their political stance as opposed to what do we do to make things better.
Mm-hmm.
And it's come on, you guys. So it's these there are definitely parallels. The time frames, the fast time frame where we are in the pandemic is very similar too. They had very little time.
Right.
It's like it was a race.
Mm-hmm.
The nuclear race was a race, and we are in that kind of race now too. We The pandemic has a couple of advantages, or what should have been advantages, and that this is not the first pandemic ever, and there's a body of scientific evidence about pandemics,
Mm-hmm.
and for political reasons, sometimes we ignored those things. And it's like,
Right.
wait. And the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
in the nuclear age was some of that sort of thing too. I mean, there are people, the leap into the nuclear age was so big that it was incomprehensible on many levels. Absolutely incomprehensible. And
Mm-hmm.
there was no frame of reference at all for what was going on. I mean, just the idea of sending soldiers, it's like, let's blow up a nuclear bomb and you guys run in there. I mean, that from our perspective now, that is absolutely insane because we
Yeah.
have information, there's an attitude thing too. There
Yeah.
was a thing of, that's a sacrifice they're willing to make, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
how good is that? Not very good. So so as artists, people have a variety of responses that are, and we all have our own, and we do what it is. Some people are, and especially I know of poets, I know of word people, writers of words,
Mm-hmm.
tend to be on the front edge of that.
Yes.
And they writing about their experiences, and then people like me come along later and choose from those things, and then see if I can present them musically in a different context and present them in a way that people listen differently. Um, because people do hear things differently when it's music than when it's words, even
Hmm.
if it includes the words. And it doesn't have to. Obviously, as you well know,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to include words. I mean, there's reflections and context that makes us go into that. And the music that you put around it can frame those words and can illustrate those words in ways that that make people hear them just very differently and over time. For instance, the Atomic Soldiers thing, we didn't use the entire documentary movie. That'd be a 2 hour show
Yeah.
in itself.
Yeah.
Um, we Nancy chose lines, and then we would layer them and repeat some of them, which when people are telling a story, they don't repeat themselves over and over. But in music, you can repeat things, and it's not and it makes a different kind of sense then.
Right.
So the musical treatment ha gives us a way to feel and think about things in a different way. And so that, for me, for the kind of music that I write, I mean, that's my way of looking at it. And also, there's an underlying emotional response, an emotional context to things like this, because you know engineers look at this wall behind me and start talking about the things.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the pieces. It's like, this is that piece, and this does this, and that does that, and this does this, and this is how this goes, and this is how this works. So they look at it from that point of view. Um, those of us later on, and especially poets and word writers,
Hmm.
say, what does this mean? How does this feel? And
Right.
that's why the Dreams project was so fascinating to me, because it was these workers, largely people who are, this is that where this piece goes, and that's how that works, and we do this and do that.
Hmm.
Then it's there later on, reflections and emotional responses.
Yes.
So to pull those things together, that was so that feels like my role as a composer, is to provide that kind of context. And one of the things about it also is that we we're the only we this these are our stories. Those of us
Hmm.
who are here, these are our stories, that nobody else is going to tell our stories. They don't know them. It's kind of, I feel like it's my job to tell these stories and to put these stories in a different context that other people will listen to them.
Absolutely.
So,
Cool. So I've got one more question for you, and it's
okay.
kind of similar to that. So here in the Tri Cities, we enjoy a small but very tight knit of community of musicians and artists, where everybody kind of knows everybody, and there's collaboration all over the place, and people are playing people's music and doing this and that, and it's really wonderful. So in terms of that community, what do you see as the role of that community within the larger Tri Cities community? And how do we reach outwards from our community and invite other people to join us?
Yeah, this is the question, isn't it? Because I talked about the place-bound spouse thing before. I mean, there was early on in the early days when all these people were suddenly coming here, and you
Hmm.
had a lot of place-bound spouses, a lot of whom were artists of various sorts, whether they were
Hmm.
painters or musicians or whatever, that kind of thing. So a lot of the artistic things that were done just as and just they were done, and this, it's important that they were done this way, that as a personal survival
Hmm.
mechanism. It's like, in order for me to survive in this place, I have to make art somehow
Right.
for me to survive. And then so that was a lot of the early stuff, was that. As the community develops, as time develops, we are seeing ourselves as having a different role in the community, and so it's less of private clubs. A lot of the larger musical organizations, for instance, started out as basically private clubs for people who wanted to do certain things, and they were not really done for the community. It was like they were, and now we're moving into a different, and we have been for quite a while, moving into a different way of approaching, of seeing our responsibility and as our potential and our options as being to the larger community. And as we do that, the music changes.
Hmm.
The music changes, the art, the shows that we do, whatever our particular medium is. When we start to see ourselves as part of the community as opposed to apart from the community, it changes what we do, and we start to reach out more.
Hmm.
There's more and more. there's connections between different kinds of music and different kinds of art and different kinds of theater that did not exist before.
Hmm.
When you have that inward looking focus versus the outward looking focus of we need to tell our stories, we have something to say, and that is, there's social changes that are driving that as well. That people want to change the way that we view ourselves, or the way we view each other. Um, so we're in that process, but that legacy of having it be inward looking is still an important part of it,
Hmm.
because we have to look inward first, and find our way within ourselves first, and then we look out and do things in the larger world. So the larger organizations have gone through um, very specific shifts in the way that they view themselves and the way they are organized, from being this is all for us to, oh, now we have a larger responsibility. And it's been interesting. I've been on a lot of those boards from time to time.
Hmm.
I swear, almost all of them, for for here or there, for different points. And it's been
Right.
really interesting, and to see those cultural shifts happen. And they're not, it's complicated for people. Some people don't want to change. Some people don't want to do the shift. Some people, uh, the shift cannot possibly happen fast enough.
Hmm.
And a lot of the social things that we're looking at right now, I mean, a thing too. I remember the
Yeah.
civil rights era. I personally remember the 60s.
Hmm.
I remember all those things, and it's like, it's yeah, and to see the same fight in a new way
Right.
is fascinating, and heart-wrenching in many ways too, because it's like, wow, it's 1960. That was a long time ago, and we're still doing the same thing.
Yeah.
We still have to fight the same war. What in the world?
I
and
know.
and and nuclear issues are the same thing, and scientific issues are the same thing. It's like, wait a minute, we're still fighting the same attitude of reality isn't what you see. It
Hmm.
doesn't really exist. You guys you guys are crazy. You're not presenting us with reality. On the pandemic, it's the same thing. It's like
Right.
the denial of scientific reality is mind-boggling. But
Absolutely.
but sometimes it takes time for us to respond. Popular music, tends to be more immediate,
Hmm.
immediate responses. I mean, I saw a Michael Stipe song about the pandemic, like, in March, that was amazing and
Yeah.
wonderful. And there's a lot of that sort of thing going on, where people are they just go down, sit down in their house, and get their smartphones out and record them doing a thing,
Hmm.
and it's fantastic. It's not what I do, but it's fantastic.
Yeah.
I can't do what they do. They don't do what I do. They probably could, but they
Hmm.
but they don't yet. And it's so we all there's a variety of responses, and we do what we can. And
Absolutely.
Tri-Cities is growing up, whether we like it or not. We are growing up.
Hmm. So what's next for you musically?
That's a hard question. Um, one of the things about the pandemic is that all of my projects went away.
Hmm.
Every single one of my composing projects got put on hold. Every single
Hmm.
one. Some of them just went completely away. I have a new one. I have a commission for the Washington ACDA, American Choral Directors Association, for next summer.
Hmm.
An ongoing project, and so I was like, oh, good, a project.
Yeah.
Um, but a lot of what I'm doing right now is involving in this shift of my performing space used to be being in the meat world with people in live air, and that almost doesn't happen now.
Yeah.
So my performance hall is now my computer. My performance
Mm.
hall is Logic,
Yeah.
and Final Cut. These are this is my performing hall now.
Yeah.
So I am in the process of doing that shift. I've done a lot of multi-track recordings for my church
Mm.
job. I'm doing some of that for Mid Columbia Master Singers as well. So there's this shift. There's this sudden imposed shift that my first response was nope, and and that lasted for a little while, and that lasts for a varying amount of time for people. Some people are still in the nope mode, and probably won't come out of it, and that's fine.
Hmm.
It's their reality. For me, it's like, no, I have to make this shift. So I
Right.
am you know riding the wave best I can,
Yeah.
figuring out what where the next thing is. And so I'm living in computer land and internet land and electronic land, and learning a lot of things and sharpening skills that I never knew I needed.
Well, whatever's next, I can't wait to hear it, and I know a lot of people feel the same way. Reg, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, happy to do it. Can't wait for the release of that album. That's going to be cool.
Absolutely. So everybody's following along at home. Manhattan Project comes out on Thursday, August 6th, which, if you've been keeping score at home, is a mildly important day in American history and world history. So yeah, I hope you get to check it out. It'll drop everywhere, Spotify, iTunes, everywhere on August 6th. Thanks again, Reg.